welcome to our program Where God Weeps, a program in which we talk about the situation of the suffering church around the world. When we hear news about the violent conflicts happening in Israel and in the Palestinian territories, we always associate it with the conflict between Arab Muslims and Israeli Jews. And quite often, we forget about another group that has been present in that region since the 1st century, the Christians in the Holy Land. To know more about the situation of Christians in this region, it is my privilege to welcome Oliver Maksan, a journalist with many years covering news in the Middle East. Oliver, it's so very nice to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Oliver, what are you doing there precisely in Israel? You live in Jerusalem. Why are you living there?
Well, I'm a correspondent for Age of the Church in Need, covering the Middle East, the situation that is going on there, especially the impacts of the so-called Arab Spring on the situation of Christians in the whole region. Countries like Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, but also the Holy Land.
When we talk about Christians in Israel and in the Palestinian territories, how many people are we talking about?
Well, when it comes to Israel, without the Palestinian territories, you have a general population of around 8 million people. Around 2% of that population are Christians. In total numbers, that would be around 160,000 in Israel. When it comes to the Palestinian territories, we have to distinguish in the West Bank with East Jerusalem. You have around, there are no really exact numbers, but let's talk about 45 to 50,000 Christians only. In Gaza, you have around 1,300 Christians only in a population of about 1.8 million. So you can see how tiny that community is there.
Are they Arabs as of ethnic origin?
Well, most of them are. All of them are in the Palestinian territories. They are native Arabs, Palestinians. In Israel, the majority is. From these 160,000 Christians I mentioned, around 80% are Arab Christians, Israeli citizens, but of Arab ethnicity, nationality. And the rest is mostly of Russian origin, that is, people who came to Israel after the collapse of the Soviet Union under the law of return that enabled Jews and their spouses to come to Israel. And many of these spouses were mostly Russian Orthodox Christians, so that from the beginning of the 90s you have a growing number from Russian Orthodox Christians coming to Israel.
It's interesting that because they are married to a
Jew by law. That means, for example, when your grandfather was a Jew, then you are entitled to immigrate to Israel, but also yourself, you are not necessarily a Jew by Orthodox law, but you also could be easily a Christian, but being considered a Jew under the law of return. Now
that you're mentioning being a Jew, the Israeli state is a Jewish state, and that has been a little controversial when we don't understand exactly what does that mean. What is a Jewish state?
Yeah.
Is it related to a race? Is it related to a religion? How is it defined?
Well, the problem is it's about Judaism itself. Judaism is on one hand a religion, but on the other hand the Jewish people considers itself being a people. So when we speak about the Jewish state of Israel, it would be like the French state, the national state, nation state of the French people or of the American people or of the British people. In that case, it would be the nation state of the Jewish people. But since they are a religion, have a distinct religion, this state also gives a lot of room to the Jewish religion.
Now, does that affect, for instance, the status of Christian citizens? Meaning, if they're not Jewish by religion, does it affect the rights and the privileges that they are allowed to receive?
Well, not by law. I mean, there is freedom of religion in Israel. In theory, all Israeli citizens are considered to be equal. But there are a lot of distinctions made on the level of society, since you have a majority of around 70% or 80% even of Jews in Israeli society. This is the predominant religion, and there are some tendencies of exclusion that also affect Israeli Arab Christians.
Now that you mention Israeli Arabs, you know, this is, and you must know a little more than what I do about this conflict. You know, it has been forever. Some people trace it to the creation of the State of Israel, but some people go even further back in history. It's a region that has been disputed for so many cultures, so many groups, so many ethnic groups. But in general, what is the situation between Arab-speaking Christians or Palestinian Christians and Hebrew-speaking Christians? Are they polarized as well in this conflict, even though they are Christians?
Yeah, they are. You can say that. I mean, there are different tendencies. The Arab Christians tend to be pro-Palestinian because they are Palestinians, or Palestinians living in Israel. And the Hebrew-speaking Christians, since they are integrated into the Jewish mainstream society, tend to be pro-Israeli, since they are Israeli citizens and considered to be like Jewish citizens of that state, because they are married, for example, to a Jew. So yeah, you have these tendencies. But the church is trying to reconcile those groups. I mean, there is no animosity or any hostile relations between them, but the church wants them to overcome these divisions and to give a Christian testimony of unity in that region.
Now, what happens with all this wave of immigrants, particularly from the Philippines and some other countries that are predominantly Catholic, and that they're migrating to Israel to cover some of the job positions?
Yeah.
What is the situation with these Christians in Israel?
Well, they are mostly Catholics, and they do not count into that number I gave you, 160,000. These are permanent residents or citizens of the state. Those immigrant population you were mentioning, they are visiting guest workers. They mostly have contracts. They are mostly Filipinos or coming from India, Sri Lanka, for a certain period only, like 5 years, and then they go back to their respective countries. And mostly they work in jobs like caretaking jobs, working with the elderly or ill and sick people. So this is what they do, and this improves the standing of Christianity in Israel. Because for historic reasons, the Jewish mainstream tends to identify Christianity with all the bad memories they have from Christian Europe, the persecution and all these things. And these people are first not Arabs, so they do not take part of that conflict they have with the Arabs. The Arab Christians are part of that conflict as well. So they are not Arabs, and they are not Europeans. They come from Asia, mostly. So they give them a rather positive image of Christianity, and there are first signs that the standing of Christianity is improving, at least a bit.
And what happened to, I mean, you mentioned that they're there for a short time,
yeah.
But nevertheless, what happened with the children of these migrants?
Yeah.
They become Israeli citizens, but they keep their Catholic faith. How does that work?
Well, they are not Israeli citizens, and they cannot become. It's difficult to become an Israeli citizen, but they go to Israeli schools and they are taught in Hebrew. So they are part of the Hebrew-speaking Christian community.
And that's the point where I wanted to get, this Hebrew-speaking Christian community. It sounds quite original, for lack of a better word, Christian people speaking in Hebrew. What is the pastoral work that is happening with this group of people?
Yeah, well, when we refer to the Catholic Church, they have a vicariate. It's called the St. James Vicariate, and this is the structure of the Latin Patriarchate for the Hebrew-speaking Catholics of Israel. Well, they have they translated the Roman Missal into Hebrew. They have Hebrew songs, so the whole liturgy is in Hebrew, and they have a lot of pastoral programs like Catechism for the Children, with the aid of ACN. Also, a lot of these books for catechism were printed and translated and made. So this is a big help, a very good tool for the Church to teach faith to these young Hebrew-speaking migrants.
Is there any animosity because of these initiatives of Hebrew in Christian faith? The reason why I ask you this is because Israeli people are very proud of bringing back Hebrew language, and they're they feel it very personal, you know. So when the language is being used in a religion context, like celebrating Mass in Hebrew, I don't know if that causes some kind of conflict.
Well,
not necessarily violence.
I don't think anybody's aware of that, because it's such a tiny community. You know, you have just a couple of parishes where Mass is celebrated in Hebrew. Most of the Catholic Masses are celebrated in Arabic, because it's the language of the majority. So I don't think that anybody is aware of that there is like a genuine Catholic community using this language. So I never heard of any problems with respect to that.
Oliver, what do you think is the balance or the sequel after the Pope's visit to the country?
Well, this is hard to say, you know, to measure these things. The Pope gave wonderful speeches, and he did some very important gestures, like embracing and hugging with a rabbi and imam at the Wailing Wall. These things are more atmospheric, you know. You cannot measure what did they really change. He did not solve the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, and nobody expected him to do that. But he strengthened at least the Christians in the region to overcome the divisions and to work into the right direction, which is also very important. I mean, because of his personal relationship to Judaism, his friendships dating back to his time in Argentina, he really has a very good standing in the Jewish mainstream. You can say that. Pope Francis is very popular amongst Israeli Jews, and so this helped also to improve the standing of Christianity in Israel.
And what is the general impact? I know it's difficult to measure, but what is the impact of the Church, the Catholic Church, in this region, in Israel, in the state of Israel, and in the Palestinian territories?
The Church is doing a lot. The Church is having a lot of schools, even a university in Bethlehem. So in the Palestinian society, I would say the cultural impact of the Catholic Church and Christianity in general is much more bigger than their number. Also because you have a lot of Christian intellectuals like journalists or even politicians who are represented by more than the community is actually big. This refers to the Palestinian territories. In Israel without the Palestinian territories, I mean, there is not so much of a Christian intellectual presence in the public or that. You have that more in the Palestinian territories.
But are there schools, Catholic schools in Israel, hospitals?
Well, they mostly serve the local Arab community.
In this eternal conflict that we've mentioned, is there a grain of hope that we as Christians are bringing into the table? Well,
I don't think so. We have to be realistic. The Christians, the number is very tiny, and it is not... the Christians, at least the Arab-speaking Christians, identify with the Palestinian national cause. They are not radical, they do not advocate the use of violence in these things, but they are very staunch supporters of the Palestinian national cause. So they are on one side. You cannot say they are not like bridge builders, but because they identify with the Palestinian national movement. And again, I don't think they have really any impact on the general picture.
What about this Christian presence helping the people, like for instance after the attacks in Gaza, or even attending to the refugees, not necessarily in these territories, but like in Jordan and Lebanon? Well,
the Catholic Church is doing a lot. You mentioned Gaza. For example, during the war we had in summer 2014, July, August, due to the Israeli bombardment, many people lost their homes, and they find refuge in some church compounds and church structures. And it was the Catholic Caritas, for example, who helped them. And most of these people are Muslims. 99% are Muslim. And this also helped a lot to improve the relations between the tiny Christian community in Gaza and the big Muslim majority over there.
With the occupied territories and the Israel authorities and the settlers getting more and more into these Palestinian areas, how does this affect the Christians in those regions in particular?
Not so much the settlements, but for example the construction of the separation barrier you've heard of. Since 2004, Israel is constructing a separation wall between the West Bank and Israel. And in some cases, Christian land was confiscated to build that wall. There is a very famous case now in Kremizan, which is close to Bethlehem, where 58 Christian families and 2 Catholic monasteries have to face the possibility to lose their land for that wall. So this is how they would be affected directly by Israeli construction in that region. When it comes to the settlements, not so much. I mean, this affects them like it affects every other Palestinian. It is a matter of movement, freedom of movement in this region, and is taking away Palestinian land from them. But yeah, mostly they are affected by things like the separation barrier.
Initiatives like this one, like the walls and all these barriers around both countries. Although somebody would complain that I cannot call a country the Palestinian territories, but what does these initiatives create in the people? More anger, more frustration? They're just like a catalyst for more violence?
Well, sure it does. I mean, nobody can deny that it has these effects. Also, frustration is growing and some kind of desperation. People also tend to give up. They say, we cannot change anything. It's been now 20 years of negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Nothing is coming out of it. The construction of the settlements is going on. So this is if you take the temperature of people on the street, many would say that we somehow gave up on this. Nothing will come out of it.
Even though the situation is worsened, in terms of more invasion, we could call, or more occupation, let's say, of territories, it doesn't exacerbate the...
Sure it does. I mean, it deepens the division between the two peoples, because there is a complete lack of trust between them. And trust is necessary to build on it and to implement one day the two-state solution, which is the only solution, in my opinion, to that conflict.
What are the obstacles for such a promise that we've heard for so many years, decades now? The creation of 2 independent states.
Well, there are a lot of objective problems who are hard to solve. For example, the status of East Jerusalem. The Israelis, they annexed formally East Jerusalem after they conquered it in 1967. So they want to keep it. And the Palestinians insist that East Jerusalem, with the old city where the Holy Sepulchre Church is, or the famous Temple Mount, they insist that this would be their future capital. So it's hard to find any compromise on that. Another big issue would be the refugee problem. I mean, You have millions of Palestinian refugees around the world who are descendants from the refugees of the year 1948, which was the year of the establishment of Israel. Most of these peoples fled their places in Haifa, in Jaffa, in Nazareth, and went to the neighboring countries because they thought that they could return soon to what is nowadays Israel. So this problem is very hard to solve because these people want to come back to Israel, and this would change demographically completely the character of that state. It would cease to be a Jewish state because the ethnic majority would be Arab then. So this is an objective problem. But then again, you have on both sides extremists who do not want a peaceful solution to that conflict. You have Hamas terrorists and radical Islamists who want the whole of historic Palestine for themselves.
Let me interrupt you there, Oliver. Do you put them in the same group, Hamas and extremist terrorist groups? Do you think, even though they are the political representation for Gaza, you consider that they belong to extremist and
sure they are. I mean, this is what
terrorist groups.
They advocate the use of force, also against civilians, to achieve their goals.
In that regard, they do feel the bill for that category.
I would say so. I mean, yeah.
And again, it's another element of to make things complicated. That how do you negotiate with a group with such stigma?
Yeah, and on the other side, you have also Jewish extremists. There is the settler movement is very strong. It's part of the current government of Benjamin Netanyahu, and there are people who think also in apocalyptic terms and not in political terms. They want a war to end all wars, to bring back the third temple and to bring back Jewish sovereignty over all of the land of Israel, what they can consider to be theirs. So these people are really not interested in a solution, and they are dictating more or less by terrorist attacks and intransigence, creating obstacles to peace.
And in Israel, are they getting more influence, these ultra-Orthodox groups?
We're not speaking about ultra-Orthodox. This would be a special group. We speak more about national religious groups. Those are Jews who combine nationalism and religious ideas. So yes, these groups are growing stronger. You have a shift to the right in the Israeli society, a phenomenon that has been going on for a couple of years now.
Because of new immigrants, or why?
Yeah, this also was a factor. The big immigration of Russian immigrants after the collapse of the Soviet Union. They have no real feeling for the Arab population, and they come from a more authoritarian background. So they brought this mentality to Israel. But also because of the situation of the last 20 years, like the Second Intifada, a lot of terrorist attacks. So a growing number of Israelis think there cannot be a solution with the Palestinians.
So what do you think would be the most relevant needs of Christians in Israel and in Palestine? And by needs, I mean ways that maybe we as the Universal Church can support.
Yeah. Well, Aid to the Church in Need is doing a lot now to help the Church in the Holy Land fulfill its mission. Well, mostly it's help the Church in the structures it has, but also in promoting the spiritual mission, like that would be like summer camps for scouts, for example, projects for evangelization of the Christian population. And
this is organized by the local Catholic Church?
Yes.
That's what they do?
Yeah, that's what they do, and we, Aid to the Church in Need, helps them doing that.
And just I don't want to finish our conversation without asking you about the holy sites. The current situation will guarantee their preservation and the use of them, meaning access to these holy sites, Christian holy sites?
Well, in general, yes. The problem is with the Palestinian Christians who want to come to Jerusalem, because they need a permit to enter Israel and Jerusalem. So in most of the cases they get it, but not always. For example, if an Arab Christian and Palestinian Christian from Nablus in the West Bank wants to come for Easter to Jerusalem, he has asked to first for a permit, and secondly, he does not get it necessarily. So there are some obstacles, but for tourists and also for the Christians in Israel, there is free access to the holy sites.
And there is a collaboration of the Israeli government and the church to preserve this holy site?
Sure, they have to. Yeah.
They have, and it is happening.
Yeah.
Well, Oliver, thank you so much. It's such a wide and complex topic to talk about Israel and Palestine, but thank you for sharing these commentaries with us, and it helps us to learn and understand a bit more the situation of our brothers and sisters in this territory.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us in another episode of Where God Weeps. If you want to learn more about the situation of the church in Israel and the Palestinian territories and in other parts of the world where the church is suffering, we encourage you to contact the information at the end of this program. Thank you, and God bless.